Sleet needled through the gap in Grace Singh's scarf as she stepped out of the emergency entrance at 2:17 a.m. And the cold hit the sweat still drying at the base of her neck from 14 hours of intake translation under fluorescent lights that never softened. Her ankles ached inside shoes that had stopped being waterproof last winter. Her stomach had been quiet too long to even growl, and the paper cup in her hand had gone flat and bitter an hour earlier. She stood under the overhang long enough to count what she had left before the next shift claimed her body again. 2 20s, 1 folded 5, 3 1s, and coins she kept separate out of habit. $38. 2 overdue rent notices in her bag. Friday, still 2 days away. Inside, a trauma alert rang out, and the automatic doors hissed open behind her, releasing antiseptic heat, voices in 3 languages, and one nurse calling for her by last name. She turned, translated 2 rushed consent questions for a grandmother whose hands wouldn't stop shaking, and only then let herself leave for real. Her phone showed 12 missed notifications, 11 from a landlord portal she had stopped opening at work because her concentration fractured whenever she saw the red banner, 1 from a number saved years ago and never deleted. She swiped that last one away without listening, then opened the transport app and stared at surge pricing she couldn't justify. Bus, walk, bus again. She knew the arithmetic before she checked it. By the second week of October, she had reduced every decision to sequence and cost. Which deli still sold day-old soup after midnight? Which laundromat would let her run 1 extra dryer cycle if she translated for the owner's aunt over speakerphone? Which route gave her 10 dry minutes under scaffolding before the rain reached her socks? Tonight's second job had come through an agency text at noon. Private dinner service, formal protocol required. Black jacket and gloves, downtown tower with elevator access through freight entrance. 4-hour minimum. Cash tip possible. She had accepted before finishing her first coffee, and spent her lunch break sewing a cuff back onto a borrowed jacket with white thread she darkened using marker ink. The Belandi Tower rose out of wet streets and idling black cars with the indifferent shine of money that didn't notice weather. Security lights turned the sleet into glitter, and polished stone reflected her in fragments as she passed through staff screening, badge clipped too low, collar damp. A house manager with silver hair and a narrow tablet checked her name and gave one glance to the frayed edge of her sleeve before speaking in clipped, formal diction that made the question sound like a verdict already reached. Temporary staff do understand protocol, Miss Singh? Grace kept her chin level. Yes, ma'am. No visible phones. No direct eye contact unless addressed. Enter from service side, exit from service side. Pour from the right. You will be silent unless spoken to. Yes, ma'am. The manager's gaze dropped once to Grace's shoes, where dark rain had wickered through the seams, then returned to her face. Try not to rush. Panic reads as clumsy. Grace nodded and followed the line of uniformed staff through a corridor lined with framed black and white photographs of ships, old ports, and men in tailored coats standing beside vintage cars. The carpet swallowed footsteps. The air smelled like citrus polish, expensive tobacco, and food richer than anything she had eaten in months. Crystal lights scattered across marble floors, clean enough to mirror the ceiling's gold inlay, and every surface carried that controlled stillness of a place where protocol mattered as much as power. Service work rewarded observation, and survival had trained her to catalog quickly. 5 guests at the table when she entered with the first tray. 2 security men near the far doors, not pretending to be staff. 1 valet in gloves by the bar station, younger than the others, checking his watch too often. 3 bottles of vintage scotch aligned by year and region, labels turned outward. At the head of the table, Matteo Belandi sat in a dark suit that looked almost black under the chandelier. Posture still, eyes moving without hurry. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Men older than him paused when he shifted a hand. Grace kept her gaze lowered to the acceptable angle and moved through practiced motions she had learned in banquet halls and hospital fundraisers and private events where people debated market moves over courses she could not pronounce. Her wrists trembled once when she lifted a crystal decanter, and she tightened her grip until her knuckles cooled against the glass. She had translated panic attacks in triage rooms all week. She knew what adrenaline did to breathing, knew how to keep it from showing in the shoulders. In. 4 counts. Out. 4 counts. Keep your hands steady. Keep the tray flat. Fragments of conversation reached her anyway. Shipping schedules, arbitration, a minister's office asking for delay language. Numbers that belonged to another altitude of life. She pictured her own rent notices folded around one another in her bag, thin paper softened at the edges from being unfolded and refolded under bad lighting. In this room, 1 bottle on the sideboard could cover 6 months of her apartment, maybe 8 if she skipped heat and stretched groceries with lentils the way her mother taught her. The contrast sat under her breastbone like a stone. When the second service began, the manager intercepted her near the kitchen door, fingertips briefly pinching the repaired cuff. "Your jacket," she said quietly. "You were told black stitching only." "I fixed it on break," Grace answered, equally quiet. "I didn't have the right thread." The manager held her gaze for 1 long beat, then released the fabric. "Do not draw attention to yourself." Grace gave the smallest nod and returned to the floor with a tray of glasses that cost more than her monthly transit card. Humiliation had a temperature. It burned hot in the face and cold at the spine. She swallowed it and moved. Near 3:30, as plates were cleared and the formal conversation loosened into low, strategic talk, she completed her final pass at the table. One guest signaled for another pour, then waved it off with a distracted apology and pushed a folded bill toward the tray without looking up. Grace didn't touch the bill. Agency policy was strict. And tonight, she needed the agency to keep calling her. She set down the fresh glass, collected the empties, and, because her fingers had gone numb and she didn't trust her voice to explain why she couldn't break that bill for bus fare, she slipped 1 engraved silver coin from the tiny zip pocket inside her sleeve and placed it beside the untouched tip. "Keep the change," she said softly. The line aimed to sound casual, almost light, as if she had options she did not have. It was an old habit from childhood, that coin in her sleeve. Her father had given it to her for bad weather days, turning it over in his calloused palm before night shifts in his cab. Heavy for its size, ringed edge worn smooth on one side, a rare mint mark stamped near the date. He used to say it was lucky. After he died, she carried it anyway, less charm than anchor, a small piece of metal that reminded her to keep moving even when debt and grief blurred into one long corridor. The valet by the bar saw it first. His hand stopped halfway to a bottle, and the ice scoop struck the crystal bucket with a hard, bright click. He stared at the coin, as if it had spoken. Then he looked up, not at Grace, but past her, toward the head of the table. The color left his face so quickly she noticed from across the room. Grace followed that line of sight and found Matteo Belandi already watching. He didn't reach for the coin. He didn't ask a question. His expression changed by degrees, not dramatically, but enough that the nearest guest shifted in his chair and went quiet mid-sentence. The room's sound thinned around the edges. Even the manager stilled by the door, tablet lowered, waiting for instruction that had not yet been given. Matteo leaned back a fraction, eyes fixed on the tray, and said one sentence to no one in particular, voice low and precise. "Who brought that in?" No one answered immediately. The valet's glove trembled against the bottleneck, hard enough to make the glass rattle once, then again. Grace felt a line of cold trace down her back beneath the jacket. She couldn't read the code she had stepped into, only the shift in gravity. Staff training taught invisibility. This was the opposite. She set the tray on the sideboard, murmured, "Excuse me?" to the manager when she passed, and took the service corridor out before anyone decided her name mattered more than protocol. The corridor smelled like detergent and hot metal from warming trays. Her breaths came shallow, then steadier as she moved past storage doors, down the freight elevator, through loading security, into rain that had turned finer and meaner in the wind tunnel between buildings. Stale smoke drifted from the dock shelter where two kitchen porters argued over crates in Spanish. She tugged her scarf tighter and started toward the bus stop, counting steps, counting money, counting the minutes before first light and her next shift. Footsteps matched her pace half a block later, then slowed when she slowed. "Grace?" The voice came warm, almost smiling, and her throat closed before she turned to find Ronan Hale. "Grace," Ronan said again, stepping out from the shadow of a scaffold pole as if he had every right to occupy the narrow strip of sidewalk she needed to cross. Rain beaded on his charcoal coat and slid off cleanly, expensive wool untouched by the slush soaking the cuffs of her pants. His smile was the same one he used to wear at landlord meetings and bank desks, courteous and patient, all polished edges and no heat. "You vanished." She stopped because running in wet shoes would send her down hard, and because panic had taught her that sudden movement invited pursuit. She kept her tote tight against her side, fingers digging into the canvas where rent notices bent against her palm. "You don't get to talk to me." Ronan tilted his head, studying her face as if she were a document he planned to challenge line by line. That tone, in public. His eyes slid over her borrowed jacket, paused on the frayed cuff, then returned to her mouth. "You should be careful who hears you. You're on thin ice with everyone right now." A cab hissed past, throwing dirty water against the curb. One of the kitchen porters under the loading dock shelter glanced over, recognized tension, and deliberately looked away. Grace felt the familiar humiliation rise, hot in her cheeks despite the cold rain, because Ronan knew how to stage a scene without appearing to cause it. He moved half a step closer, close enough for her to catch stale mint and the sharp cologne he only wore when he wanted to look respectable. "I'm heading home," she said, forcing her voice flat. "Move." "Home," he repeated, soft and almost amused. "The one with 2 overdue notices taped to your account and a final warning due by Friday?" He lifted one shoulder in a mild shrug. "You should lock your mailbox, Grace. People can be nosy." Her skin prickled from scalp to wrist. She had changed the online portal password twice. She had not changed the mailbox key because that required a deposit she didn't have. He watched the realization land and smiled wider. "You opened my mail?" "I prevented surprises," he said. "You always hated surprises." A security guard by the service entrance stepped out to check a delivery van reversing toward the dock. Grace turned slightly, ready to call out. Ronan tracked the movement, then raised his voice just enough to carry. "We're fine," he said toward the guard, adding a quick laugh meant for witnesses. "Long shift, she's exhausted." The guard looked at Grace, then at Ronan's open posture, then back at the van. Protocol favored calm over conflict when no one was shouting. He nodded once and returned to waving the driver in. Grace's throat tightened with a helpless anger that tasted metallic, because this was always the mechanism. Ronan controlled tone, and tone controlled perception. He lowered his voice again. "You made me chase you from Queens to Midtown, and now downtown. Do you understand what that cost me in time?" I didn't ask you to look for me. You don't have to ask, he said. You signed your name to obligations. I'm the one cleaning up after your chaos. Grace's pulse thudded behind her eyes. Signed. Obligation. Cleaned up. He was laying legal words like stepping stones, terms he could repeat later with that same patient face while she sounded frantic and contradictory. She shifted her tote to free one hand near her phone pocket, but kept it hidden by the bag's flap. You took cards out in my name, she said, each word measured. You forged documents. You moved money through my account. Ronan's expression did not change, but his jaw clicked once. Careful. Or what? He gave her a disappointed look, as if she had failed an easy test. Or people start asking why your signature appears everywhere. Courts like paper trails. Banks love them. Cold wind pushed sleet across the street in slanted lines, stinging her face. Somewhere above them, a loose metal panel banged twice against scaffolding and fell quiet. Grace took one step backward toward brighter light. Ronan mirrored her without hurry, preserving the distance he preferred, near enough to crowd, far enough to seem polite. By 3:41 a.m., the street had emptied to delivery trucks, smokers, and insomniacs, moving fast with their collars up. Fewer witnesses. Fewer interruptions. You look thin, he said, voice dropping into manufactured concern. Are you even eating? These little charity shifts don't pay enough to keep up with debt service. You were never good with numbers. I worked 2 jobs. At hospitals and parties where they make you enter through freight elevators, he said, letting contempt lace the sentence. Serving men whose cufflinks are worth more than your lease. That's not a plan. That's theater. The words landed because they were true in shape and cruel in intent. She held his gaze anyway, refusing to glance toward the tower where marble and crystal stayed dry while she stood in wet socks counting bus fare. I don't need your commentary. You need structure, he said, and guidance. He reached to brush rain from her shoulder in a gesture that looked tender from 10 feet away. She flinched back before he touched fabric. His smile thinned for 1 second, then reset. Don't do that, he murmured. You make me look like a villain. You handle that on your own. A burst of laughter echoed from the dock shelter where 2 prep cooks shared a cigarette, then cut off when they noticed Ronan's stare flick toward them. They stubbed out the cigarette and slipped inside through the service door. The silence left behind felt abrupt, like a room after a power outage. Ronan followed her line of sight and nodded slightly, as if pleased. See? No one wants your drama. She adjusted her grip on the tote to stop her hand from shaking. What do you want? Simple, he said. You come with me. We review accounts. You sign corrective forms. I make calls. This goes away. I'm not getting in a car with you. That wasn't a request. Rain intensified, turning from needles to a hard, cold sheet that blurred the far curb and turned headlights into smeared halos. Ronan glanced toward a black sedan idling near the loading zone, wipers beating an impatient rhythm. Grace had not noticed it arrive. The plate was streaked with road grime. The windows were dark enough to reflect only light, not faces. She stepped sideways to keep the sidewalk between them, and he matched her again. You're still doing that, he said, trying to make distance into control. Distance is the point. For you, maybe. For me, this is accounting. He lifted his hand, counting on his fingers. Rent arrears, legal fees, interest, fees on fees. You owe me restitution for reputational damage. She almost laughed at the phrase, the audacity of it. But laughter would have shaken loose the fear she was holding down with effort. Reputation? His eyes hardened. You walked out. You made accusations. You told people private things. I spent a year repairing the narrative. There it was. The truth he rarely spoke plainly. Narrative mattered more than harm. Appearance over fact. A man could be anything if he sounded controlled while saying it. Behind him, the service entrance opened and closed without noise. Grace noticed movement in the reflection of a puddle first. A figure in black gloves near the threshold, still as a post. She looked up and recognized the young valet from upstairs, the one whose hand had trembled over the crystal bucket. He stood partly hidden by the doorframe, shoulders rigid, eyes fixed on Ronan rather than on her. When Ronan turned his head a fraction, the valet recoiled and disappeared inside so quickly the door barely had time to swing. The tiny exchange lit up every alarm in her body. Ronan had not come here by chance. Someone in that building either knew him or feared him. Maybe both. Who was that? She asked before she could stop herself. Ronan blinked at her, then followed her gaze to the now closed door. Staff, he said lightly. They all looked nervous around conflict. He looked at you like he knew you. Ronan smiled again, but it arrived slower this time. In this city, everyone knows everyone eventually. A truck backed into the dock with a shrill beeping that carved the air into sharp pieces. For 3 seconds, the sound gave her cover from his voice, and she used it to pull her phone halfway from her pocket behind the tote. The screen lit against her thumb. 6% battery. She slid to the emergency shortcuts, page by feel, and dimmed the brightness to near black. When the beeping stopped, Ronan stepped into her space with deliberate calm, forcing her toward the corrugated metal wall beside the loading bay gate. He didn't grab her yet. He didn't need to. The geometry did the work. You're shaking, he said quietly. Look at me. She did not. Look at me, Grace. She stared at the notch in his tie where rain had darkened silk and counted breaths instead. In for 4. Out for 4. Keep your voice level. Keep your hand steady around the phone. I said what I came to say, she replied. Move. His expression settled into that polished patience she feared more than shouting. You're going to come down to the dock office and sign a repayment acknowledgement. Tonight. If you cooperate, I can still frame this as a misunderstanding. If you don't, I file first thing in the morning and freeze what's left of your accounts. No money means no apartment. No apartment means no hospital credential renewal. They review addresses for contract staff now, didn't you hear? The details were specific enough to be plausible, broad enough to be a trap. She tasted copper again, where she had bitten the inside of her cheek without noticing. He leaned closer, voice warm enough to pass for concern. I am giving you a path, he said. Don't make me choose the other one. A hard gust swept through the loading lane, carrying wet cardboard, diesel, and the distant burn of cigarette smoke. The security light above them flickered twice, then steadied at half strength, leaving shadows pooled around the dock door. Somewhere inside the building, a buzzer sounded and cut off. No one came out. Grace kept her face blank and angled the phone in her palm until her thumb found the emergency voice memo icon. She did not press it yet. She needed him talking. She needed him specific. She needed one clean record that could survive his smile. Ronan watched her for a long second, then tilted his head toward the metal door marked "Staff Only," as if inviting her into a conference room instead of a trap. After you, he said. And this time the politeness in his voice felt like a hand at the back of her neck. Grace did not move toward the door. She let the tote slide from her shoulder into the crook of her elbow and lowered her gaze as if weighing his demand. using the angle to hide the phone in her palm. Her thumb pressed the emergency shortcut. A faint vibration confirmed the voice memo had started. 6% battery dropped to 5. Ronan mistook her silence for surrender. He opened the door with a practiced flourish and held it while rain sprayed in around his coat sleeve. "There you go," he said, louder now, for the dock cameras and anyone within earshot. "We'll sort this out like adults." Grace stayed on the sidewalk and lifted her voice just enough to carry. "Sort out what exactly?" His eyes narrowed by a degree. "Your repayment? For which debt?" He gave a soft, exasperated laugh. "Grace, don't perform. I need you to explain it." She shifted one step backward, keeping him framed by the security light. "You said I signed things. What things?" He let the door ease shut and faced her fully, composure slipping at the edges. "Credit lines, transfer authorizations, emergency loans. Stop pretending. I have copies." "Copies with my forged signature," she said, clear and even. "And you told me if I didn't sign tonight, you'd freeze my accounts." The dock guard looked over again, this time lingering. Ronan clocked it and smiled toward the man, then dropped his voice to a hard whisper that sliced through his pleasant expression. "Lower your tone. You threatened my housing credential with the hospital too," she continued, louder. "Should I repeat that for the camera?" His hand shot out and caught her wrist. The grip landed exactly where old bruises had faded to yellow 2 weeks earlier. Pain flashed hot, then cold. Her breath snagged, but she held his gaze. "Don't test me in public," he said, smiling while he said it. "You know how this ends." "With you admitting it?" she asked. The guard took a step forward. "Sir, is there a problem?" Ronan did not release her. He turned his head enough to answer without breaking posture. "Domestic disagreement. She's overtired." Grace lifted her free hand, palm out toward the guard, and kept her words formal. "Please note that I said no. He is holding me against my will." The sentence changed the air. The guard stopped, radio rising toward his mouth. Ronan's fingers tightened once. Then he yanked Grace toward him by her wrist and collar in one sharp motion that dragged her off balance. Her shoulder struck the corrugated wall with a metallic thud that echoed under the loading canopy. Pain jolted down her arm. Her phone nearly slipped, but she trapped it against her palm. "You just made this expensive," Ronan hissed, all pretense gone. Grace tasted rain and rust where her lip hit her teeth. "Let go." He pulled again, steering her toward the curb lane where the idling sedan waited with its rear door now cracked open. Through the dark glass, she caught the silhouette of a second person in the front seat, motionless. At 3:46 a.m., the loading lane that had felt merely hostile shifted into a clear abduction geometry. Open car, narrowed path, body leverage, witness confusion. Grace drove her heel down onto Ronan's instep. He cursed and loosened just enough. She ripped her wrist free, pivoted toward the wall panel beside the dock office, and slammed her palm onto the red service alarm bar. A klaxon detonated overhead, harsh and immediate. Metal gates at both ends of the loading corridor began to descend with grinding force. Red recording lights blinked on above the dock cameras, brighter than before. Ronan froze for half a second, stunned. Grace used it. She backed into the strongest pool of light and raised her voice over the alarm. "He threatened forged debt enforcement. He attempted to force me into that vehicle. Cameras are active." The dock guard shouted into his radio. Kitchen staff appeared at the service door, then stopped at the sight of the descending gate. The sedan driver jerked forward, trying to pull out before the barrier sealed, but the gate clanged down in front of the hood, locking the car inside the lane. Ronan's expression flattened into something colder than anger. "You little—" "Finish the sentence," Grace cut in, breathing hard. "Say it clearly." He advanced one step. "Turn that alarm off and get in the office." "No." His voice rose, no longer polished. "You owe me money I put in your name. You will sign acknowledgement tonight." "Because you forged documents." "Because I had to," he snapped. "You were useless with numbers. I kept us solvent." The words hit the recording cleanly. Grace felt it like a door unlatching in her chest, not relief, not yet, but structure. Evidence had shape now. Ronan realized it one beat later. His eyes dropped to her hand, to the phone she still held low against her tote. He lunged. Grace jerked back, shoulders screaming, and his fingers closed on empty air. She turned and ran 3 strides toward the guard, but wet concrete and worn soles betrayed her. Her foot slid and she crashed to one knee, pain spiking through her leg. Ronan reached her before she could rise and fisted the back of her jacket, dragging her up by the collar. "Give me the phone." "Security," she shouted, voice breaking. "He's trying to take my device." The guard moved in, baton drawn but uncertain, pinned between protocol and the visible fact that Ronan looked like a husband in a heated argument rather than a stranger in a grab. 2 prep cooks hovered near the door, frightened and useless. The second figure in the sedan opened the front door halfway, then sat back when the guard's radio crackled with incoming response. Grace's vision narrowed to fragments. Red alarm lights, rain bouncing off black paint, Ronan's knuckles white at her collar, her own breath tearing in and out too fast. For one dangerous second she froze, body waiting for impact that had not come yet, memory trying to overwrite the present. Then the service door behind the cooks swung wide, and 4 men in dark suits moved into the lane, with the speed of people who had rehearsed this exact distance. Matteo Bellandi came behind them, no coat, rain catching in his hair and darkening the shoulders of his jacket, his face unreadable except for the controlled fury in his eyes. He took in the scene in one sweep. Grace on unsteady legs, Ronan gripping fabric at her throat, active alarm, sealed gates, camera lights, the trapped sedan. His voice cut through the klaxon, low and carrying. "Hands off her." Ronan looked over his shoulder, still holding Grace. "This is private." Matteo did not raise his volume. "Last warning. Release her." Ronan gave a short laugh that rang false. "She is my wife." "Ex-husband," Grace forced out. "Restraining petition in process." Matteo's jaw tightened. "Security chief, confirm identity. Dock guard, witness statement now. Car doors locked." One of Matteo's men moved toward the sedan, with a compact tool from his belt. Another flanked Grace without touching her, creating space. Ronan shifted, calculating routes, but the sealed gates and converging bodies had already erased his options. "Mr. Bellandi," Ronan said, trying to recover the smooth voice. "I apologize for the disruption. She's unstable and recording selectively." Matteo stepped closer, each word clipped. "Remove your hand." Ronan hesitated 1 second too long. Matteo closed the distance and peeled Ronan's grip from Grace's collar with controlled force, then pivoted Grace behind him in the same motion. Ronan stumbled back into the wet side of the sedan, swore and reached as if to re-engage. Matteo's men were on him instantly, pinning his arms against the car without striking him. "Do not touch him unless he resists," Matteo said, eyes never leaving Ronan. "Camera angles clear?" "Good. Hold." Grace swayed. The adrenaline that had carried her through the alarm and shout thinned all at once, leaving tremor and cold. Matteo turned half toward her, voice changing register without softening into pity. "Stay behind me." She nodded, unable to do more. Her throat felt scraped raw. Rain had soaked through to her undershirt. Her teeth began to chatter despite effort. Mateo looked at the nearest guard. "Medical kit. Hot drink. Now." He looked to another. "Phone in her hand is evidence. She keeps custody. Get a charger here." "Yes, sir." Within seconds, the lane transformed from chaotic dock to controlled response grid. Security sealed the office, logged names, and separated witnesses. The sedan occupants were ordered out one by one, hands visible, IDs photographed. The young valet from upstairs appeared at the threshold again, pale and shaking. And this time, Mateo saw him. "You," Mateo said. "Stay where I can see you." The valet swallowed. "Yes, sir." Grace pressed the phone tighter as if pressure alone could keep the battery alive. Screen, 3%. Recording still running. Mateo noticed. "Do not stop it yet," he told her. "State the time and what happened while it's active." She licked rain from her lips and spoke toward the microphone, voice rough but steadying with each sentence. 3:49 a.m. Loading dock on Vestry Street service lane. Ronan Hale threatened debt enforcement, admitted accounts in my name, attempted to force me toward a vehicle and grabbed my collar and wrist. Alarm activated by me. Cameras and witnesses present. "Good," Mateo said. "Again, include forged signatures." She repeated it, clearer. The act of naming restored sequence to the blur in her head. Facts, verbs, order. Ronan twisted against the hold of two guards, anger breaking through his refined mask. "You think this protects you? She owes me. Check the contracts." Mateo turned, and when he spoke, his voice was barely contained steel. "You will speak when asked. Do you understand me?" Ronan held his stare, then looked away first. A medic from building staff arrived with a compact trauma bag and thermal blanket. Grace flinched when he reached for her wrist. Mateo caught it immediately. "Announce before contact," he said. The medic nodded. "Miss Singh, I'm checking for sprain and bruising." Grace let him examine her. Tenderness radiated up her forearm, shoulder likely strained, knees scraped through damp fabric, nothing broken. He wrapped her wrist, then offered the blanket and a paper cup of hot tea so sweet it bordered on syrup. She took both with shaking hands. 3 days earlier, she had considered skipping this shift to rest because dizziness had followed her up 2 flights of stairs at home. Standing now under red alarm lights with borrowed wool around her shoulders and witness forms circulating in the rain, she understood how narrow the margin had been. Mateo stood near, but did not crowd, giving orders in short chains that turned panic into procedure. Collect dock footage from 20 minutes prior. Mirror to secure drive and legal archive. Pull interior corridor cameras. Flag every frame with Hale's entry path. Freeze access logs. Agency manager contacted within 10. "Yes, sir." Financial analyst on call. Awake and dialing in. Have him start on Hale-linked accounts tied to her name. Full audit. He finally faced Grace directly. "Can you unlock your phone for evidence transfer while maintaining original file?" "Yes." "Do it with my counsel and the guard present." She nodded and entered her passcode with stiff fingers. Battery, 2%. The young valet stepped forward without permission, voice shaking. "Mr. Belandi, I know him. He came twice this month asking service schedules. Said he was family. I didn't know he'd..." Mateo's gaze sharpened. "You will give a full statement. You will not leave this building tonight." "Yes, sir." Grace closed her eyes for one breath. Distinctive detail resolved. Ronan had pre-scouted her shifts through staff vulnerability. Not chance. pattern. When she opened them, Mateo was still watching her, expression hard, but no longer distant. He removed his suit coat and held it out. She hesitated only a beat before slipping her arms into sleeves still warm from his body heat. The coat smelled faintly of cedar and rain. "I'm arranging transport," he said. "2 vehicles, lead and tail. You are not going home alone." Her instinctive refusal rose. Pride, fear of obligation, old training against dependence. But it collided with the image of the open sedan door and died before reaching her mouth. "I need my own lawyer." "You will have one," he said. "Independent. Paid by me, chosen by you. No conditions." She searched his face for leverage, for hidden terms, and found none in that moment, only disciplined urgency. "Do you consent to temporary security detail tonight?" he asked, each word deliberate. Consent. The word steadied her more than the tea. "Yes," she said. "Good. Then listen carefully." He turned to his team. "Ms. Singh moves now. Gate stays sealed until police intake arrives. Hale remains on site with continuous recording and no private conversation. Witnesses separated. Chain of custody on her memo, doc footage, and alarm logs documented before sunrise." Ronan shouted something from the car, but rain and distance swallowed it. Mateo inclined his head toward the waiting vehicle, then looked back at Grace one last time to make sure she was tracking. "Stay between my men. Keep your phone on you. If anyone addresses you without my counsel present, you answer with your name and nothing else." Grace tightened the coat around herself, felt the wrapped wrist pulse under gauze, and stepped forward under escort as the red alarm lights kept flashing over wet concrete, turning the lane where she had almost been dragged away into the first place she had ever been believed in time. Rain slapped the pavement in hard diagonal lines as Grace moved between 2 security men toward the waiting SUV. Mateo half a step behind her and close enough that she could feel the force of his attention even when he said nothing. The loading gate remained down behind them, red alarm lights still pulsing against wet concrete, and Ronan's voice rose once in the distance before a door shut and cut him off. Grace did not look back. Her knees felt unstable, and the wrapped wrist under the gauze throbbed with each heartbeat. The rear passenger door opened before she reached it. Mateo angled his body to block the wind and waited for her to get in first. No hand at her back, no pressure, just a contained barrier between her and the lane. She slid onto warm leather that smelled faintly of cedar and clean smoke, pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders, and watched one of his men step into the rain to check beneath the chassis with a mirrored wand before nodding to the driver. Mateo got in beside her and shut the door. The noise outside dropped to a muted hiss. "Windows locked," he said to the front. "No stops. Bridge Route B. Confirm lead and tail?" A voice from the passenger seat answered through an earpiece. "Lead in front. Tail behind. Route cleared, sir." Grace stared at the raindrops racing each other down the tinted glass. Her hand still gripped her phone so tightly her knuckles ached. Battery 1%, screen dim. Recording files saved and duplicated to a secure drive 5 minutes earlier under witness signatures. She had watched the transfer happen. She had watched the guard initial each line. Still, her body behaved as if proof could evaporate unless she held the device. Mateo noticed her grip. "You can put it down." She shook her head once. He accepted that immediately and turned to the security chief in the front seat. "Luca, status." "Police intake on site at the dock. Hale detained pending formal statement. Vehicle occupants identified and separated. We have a preliminary admission clip from Ms. Singh's memo and synchronized camera timestamps." "Agency manager?" "Reached. She confirmed Ms. Singh was assigned legally and has no disciplinary issue pending." Send her written notice that Ms. Singh is under protective leave for 48 hours at full contracted rate. Bill to me." Grace looked at him then, startled despite exhaustion. "You don't have to pay. I already did," he said, voice even. "You will not lose income because he chose tonight." The SUV rolled through a yellow light, tires hissing on wet asphalt. Manhattan blurred past in slick reflections. Scaffolding, shuttered storefronts, steam from a street grate bending in the wind. Her throat still felt scraped raw from shouting over the alarm. Luca turned halfway in his seat. "Miss Singh, I need one confirmation for the chain log. Did Mr. Hale touch your phone at any point?" "No," she said. "He tried to grab it. He didn't get it." "Understood. Logged." Matteo spoke again without looking away from her. "Medical at the house is ready. Warm room, dry clothes if you want them. Doctor checks only what you consent to." Consent. The word landed where panic had been. She swallowed. "I need my own attorney before I give a full statement." "You'll have one before dawn." He glanced down at his phone, then handed it to her with a contact list already open. 3 names. Independent firms with no financial tie to me or Belandi Holdings. You choose. The screen shook in her hand from adrenaline, not cold. She read each name carefully, forcing her focus to hold. One she recognized from a tenants' rights webinar she had translated for a community clinic last spring. Anika Desai, Civil Fraud and Coercive Control Litigation. "I want Desai," Grace said. Matteo took the phone back and dialed on speaker so she could hear every word. A groggy but alert female voice answered on the 3rd ring. Matteo introduced himself in clipped form, then stopped and passed the call to Grace without commentary. Grace gave her name, location, and 1-sentence summary. Desai asked 2 precise questions, and then said, "Do not sign anything, do not speak without me present, and do not surrender your original device. I'll join by secure video in 20 minutes. I'm emailing representation terms now." Grace ended the call and let out a breath that trembled at the edges. By 4:22 a.m., they turned off the river road and through a steel gate that opened before the SUV fully slowed, revealing a narrow private courtyard lit by low amber lamps and bordered by high stone walls slick with rain. The townhouse rose 4 stories, old brick restored with expensive discretion. Its windows dark except for one on the ground floor, where warm light fell across a long table set with medical supplies. Security moved with practiced silence. Umbrellas already up, one man scanning rooftops while another checked the entry lock panel. Inside, heat wrapped around Grace so quickly her skin prickled. Marble in the foyer gave way to dark wood and thick runners that muted footsteps. A woman in a charcoal suit approached, silver hair pinned back, posture formal without stiffness. "Miss Singh, I'm Elena," she said. "House manager. You're safe here." Safe? The word felt too large to trust, but Elena's tone held no performance. Elena guided her into a sitting room that looked out onto a walled garden, now silver with rain. A fire burned low behind glass. On a side table waited tea, broth, a plate of plain toast, a charging cable still sealed in plastic, and a stack of forms with sticky tabs marking signature lines. No one pushed the papers toward her. Matteo stood by the doorway and issued instructions like a metronome. "Door detail, 2 outside, 1 in hall. No internal cameras in this room. Audio off unless requested by counsel. Doctor waits in the next room until called. Clothing brought in sealed garment bags. Chain log on her jacket and wrist wrap if she consents to evidence preservation." Grace looked down at the torn collar of the borrowed service jacket under his coat. Ronan's fingers had stretched the fabric out of shape. "Preserve it," she said quietly. "And the scarf." Elena nodded. "I'll document both in front of you." A physician entered after knocking, introduced herself as Dr. Liao, and asked permission before each step. Pupil check, shoulder range, wrist palpation, knee abrasion, clean and bandage, pain scale, hydration. Grace answered in short phrases and accepted ibuprofen only after Desai appeared on a tablet propped across from her, credentials verified by Luca, and told her it would not affect testimony. Matteo remained in the room, but outside the conversational circle, leaning against the far mantel with his arms folded, dark suit damp at the cuffs, watching exits more than faces. His presence was heavy, controlled, and strangely stabilizing in the way a locked door could be stabilizing when someone had spent too long without one. When the medical exam ended, Dr. Liao handed Grace a printed summary and 2 copies of photographic documentation. One for you, one for your attorney. Originals archived. Desai's voice came through the tablet, efficient and calm. Grace, we proceed in order. First, emergency protective filing by sunrise. Second, fraud injunction to freeze disputed debt collections. Third, criminal statement with your audio and doc footage aligned. You did the hard part tonight by creating admissible evidence. Grace nodded, throat tightening for a different reason now. She had not realized how badly she needed to hear that what she did had legal shape, not just emotional truth. Matteo stepped forward only when Desai asked for confirmation from his side. Mr. Belandi, will you grant access to all building logs and staff statements without condition? Yes, he said. Will your team preserve digital evidence in native format with metadata intact? Yes. Will you refrain from private contact with Hale outside council channels? A beat passed. Yes. Desai studied him through the screen. Then we can work. After signatures were handled and the call ended, Elena replaced the legal forms with broth and set a fresh mug of tea by Grace's hand. The house had gone quieter. Rain still tapped the windows, but the siren in Grace's nerves had dropped from full volume to a rough static. Matteo spoke to Luca from the threshold. Police outcome. Formal arrest initiated. Charges pending intake review, but they're moving fast with the recording and attempted forced transport. Good. Keep me updated every 30 minutes. Luca left. The door clicked shut. For the first time since the loading dock, Grace and Matteo were alone in a room not built around immediate threat response. She lifted the spoon and discovered her hand still shook. Matteo noticed, crossed to the sideboard, and moved the tray closer so she did not have to reach. The gesture was practical, almost impersonal, but it carried care anyway. You should sleep, he said. I don't think I can. Then rest. He looked at the bandage on her wrist, then away. You did well. The words landed harder than she expected. She set the spoon down before she dropped it. He reached into his inside pocket and placed a small, clear evidence sleeve on the table between them. Inside lay the engraved silver coin, its worn edge catching firelight. Grace stared at it, breath catching. You took it from the tray. I had it secured. His voice lowered, losing some of its command texture. I needed to be sure. Sure of what? That it was the same mark. She looked up sharply. His expression had changed again. Not softer exactly, but less armored. He sat opposite her, forearms on his knees, and for the first time that night, he seemed to choose words rather than deploy them. When I was 19, there was a shooting on the west side, he said. Not random, a message. I got out a side alley with a rib wound and no driver because my detail had been split. He paused, eyes on the coin. A cab stopped. The man driving should have kept going. He didn't. Grace's fingers tightened around the blanket. My father drove nights. I know. Mateo met her gaze. Harjit Singh, Medallion 4K27. He took me 3 boroughs east, switched routes twice to shake a tail, and stayed with me until my people found us. He refused money. He said if I wanted to repay him, I should protect someone when it counted. Grace felt the room tilt, then settle. She had grown up on fragments of that story. One dangerous fare, one long night, one promise her father never explained fully. She had thought it was his cabbie myth, half true and half weathered into legend. Mateo continued, quieter. My uncle gave him a matched coin set from an old family mint run. 2 pieces. One for him, one kept with us as marker. We used it once, then buried the memory because too many names were attached to that war. Grace swallowed against the pressure in her chest. He never told me your name. He wouldn't. That was the point. The fire clicked softly behind glass. Outside, rain thinned to a gentler rhythm. She studied Mateo's face, the fatigue he had hidden under command now visible at the edges, and something in her shifted from pure fear to a more complex, more dangerous recognition. At the dock, she said, you didn't look surprised to see Ronan. You looked furious. I was both. He unbuttoned his jacket and pulled his shirt slightly aside at the ribs, exposing a pale, jagged scar that ran along his right flank before disappearing under fabric. Your father packed this with towels from his trunk while I bled on his back seat. I remember the pattern on the seat cover. Green checks. I remember him saying, "Stay awake, son." Grace pressed her fist to her mouth. She could almost see it. Her father's broad hands, the cracked vinyl, the stubborn gentleness he offered strangers at 3 a.m. because he could not tolerate leaving someone helpless. Mateo let the shirt fall back into place. I didn't track you because of charity. I tracked the coin because it was a debt not paid. Grief rose fast and sharp, but it was braided with relief she had no script for. Her father had not vanished into hospital bills and a cremation receipt. Some part of him had remained in a promise carried by people with power she had never touched. He would hate this house, she said, voice rough with sudden tears. Too polished. He'd ask where you keep the cheap kettle. A brief, startled breath escaped Mateo, almost a laugh. There's one in the staff kitchen. Elena guards it. Grace wiped under her eyes with the heel of her hand, embarrassed by how human the moment felt after so much steel. He kept the coin in a tea tin with bus tokens and parking receipts, said lucky things belong with ordinary things. Mateo nodded slowly. Then he was wiser than most men I knew. Silence settled, not suffocating this time. Controlled, shared. From somewhere down the hall, a phone buzzed once, then stopped. Mateo didn't move to answer it. He stayed seated across from her, gaze steady, giving her the uncommon courtesy of not rushing her through the aftershock. Grace looked again at the coin in its clear sleeve, and then at him. If this is loyalty, she said, it stays on terms I can live with. His reply came without hesitation. Name them in the morning. I'll sign. For the first time all night, her breathing deepened without effort. And when she reached for the broth again, her hand was steady enough to lift the spoon without spilling. The spoon clicked softly against the porcelain as Grace lifted broth to her mouth. And the small success of not spilling it should have felt trivial. But it landed like proof that her body still belonged to her. Heat moved through her chest and settled under her ribs, loosening a knot she had carried since the loading dock. Mateo remained across from her, shoulders squared, hands relaxed on his knees now that no one was actively shouting. And the contrast between his stillness and the speed of his earlier commands unsettled her in a way she did not know how to name. She set the spoon down and looked at him over the rim of the mug. "You said you tracked the coin, not me." "I said both," he replied. "First the coin, then the staff records connected to it, then your agency profile." His honesty came too cleanly to dismiss. It also pressed against old bruises in her thinking, the years of being watched without consent and told it was care. "That sounds like surveillance." "It was," he said. No flinch. "I needed to verify whether the coin had been stolen, sold, or inherited." "And once you knew?" "I kept monitoring your assignments when I learned Hale had been seen near 2 of your shifts." He held her gaze. "That is why my team reached the dock in under a minute." The firelight made sharp planes of his face gentler at the edges, but his words remained precise, almost legal in their structure. Grace hated that part of her, felt safer hearing it that way. Another part recoiled from how much power sat behind each sentence. "You could have warned me," she said. "I did not have enough to bring to law enforcement then, and a warning without evidence might have pushed him to ground." Mateo leaned back a fraction, as if giving her space to refuse the logic. "I chose containment over disclosure." She let out a breath she had not meant to release. "You made that choice for me." "Yes." No apology, not because he felt no regret, she thought, but because he did not lie to reduce his own responsibility. That should not have mattered. It did. Her pulse thudded harder for reasons that were no longer only fear. She rose to carry the empty mug to the sideboard, then felt the pull in her shoulder and stopped halfway. Mateo stood at once, crossed the room, and took the mug from her before pain could turn sharp. He moved with deliberate restraint, close enough that she caught the clean scent of rain and wool, far enough that he did not corner her. "May I look at your bandage?" he asked. The question, simple as it was, hit with startling force. Permission first, not assumption. Grace nodded once. He touched only the gauze, checking that the wrap had not loosened, fingers careful, expression focused on the task, as if her skin were evidence and not invitation. Yet her breath still changed, quickening with an awareness that had nothing to do with injury and everything to do with proximity after terror. She pulled her hand back first, not abruptly, but enough. "This is the conflict," she said, voice low. "I trust what you did tonight. I don't trust what your power can do tomorrow." Mateo's jaw tightened, then eased. "That is a fair assessment. I'm serious. So am I." By the time the antique clock on the mantel clicked to 5:03 a.m., the rain had softened from a hard strike to a fine hiss against the garden stone, and exhaustion had made the room feel both smaller and more dangerous. Because silence gave space for emotions she had no training to triage. Grace sat again, blanket around her shoulders, and watched Mateo remain standing, as if sitting might imply a claim he had not earned. "What do you want from me?" she asked. His answer came without pause. "For tonight, survival and legal stability. Beyond tonight, I want the right to protect you." "There it is," she said, a humorless breath leaving her. The word. "Protect." The other one underneath it. Understanding moved through his expression, controlled but unmistakable. "You mean possession?" "Yes." He took one step back instead of forward, and that small retreat steadied her more than reassurance would have. "I have used that language in my world," he said. "It keeps enemies from testing boundaries. I am not one of your territories." "No." His voice dropped, roughened at the edges. "You are not." The statement should have ended the tension. It did not. Fear and attraction braided tighter, two currents pulling in opposite directions. She did not want his distance. She did not trust her wanting. A knock sounded, measured, Then Elena entered with a tablet and a thin folder. Ms. Singh, Miss Desai is back on secure line. Police intake has questions. They can wait until counsel directs. Grace nodded. Mateo moved toward the door, already seating the room, but she spoke before he crossed the threshold. Stay. He stilled. Not to answer for me, she added. To hear this. Desai appeared on the tablet, glasses low on her nose, eyes alert despite the hour. Grace, update. Hale's counsel has begun a counter-narrative claiming voluntary contact and financial dispute. Predictable. We neutralize it with sequence and boundaries. I need your immediate instruction on communication protocol with Mr. Belandi's team. Grace looked from the screen to Mateo, then back. Her voice came steadier than she felt. No statements issued in my name unless I approve the text. No negotiations with Hale without counsel present. No contact between me and Hale, direct or indirect. Desai nodded. Good. Add personal security terms now, while everyone is listening. Grace turned fully toward Mateo. You can fund security. You do not control my movement. I can accept monitored movement. No trackers on my phone. Agreed. No staff assigned inside my apartment. He hesitated for the first time. Exterior only then. Entry by request. Independent driver options, not only your people. Vetted options, yes. Desai lifted a hand on screen. Get this in writing within the hour. Signed by both parties. Grace, one more issue. Hale requested to deliver a private apology in exchange for reduced charges. Grace's stomach turned cold. Denied. Desai's gaze sharpened. Say it as a legal boundary. Grace drew a breath. I refuse all private contact with Ronan Hale. Any communication goes through counsel and recorded channels only. Documented, Desai said. Police will proceed with formal interview at 6:15 by video to avoid transport risk. Rest your voice until then. When the call ended, Elena collected the tablet and left with quiet efficiency, closing the door behind her. The room held only firelight again, and Mateo watched Grace with an intensity that was no longer tactical alone. I should have anticipated the apology tactic, he said. You anticipated almost everything else. Not your refusal to break under pressure. She met his eyes. I broke. I just did it in useful directions. Something like admiration crossed his face, unhidden this time. That may be the same thing as strength. A phone vibrated in his jacket pocket. He checked the screen, then answered on speaker without taking his gaze off her. Luca's voice came clipped and tight. Sir, Hale is demanding transfer to private medical citing chest pain. Intake medic found no acute signs. He keeps asking whether Miss Singh is here. Mateo's expression went hard, the room temperature dropping with it. He does not get her location. Yes, sir. Also, he made a statement on record. She always comes back when money runs out. Grace felt the words hit like dirty water. Old shame surged, then burned off into anger clear enough to stand on. She rose, ignored the shoulder protest, and crossed to where Mateo held the phone. Put him on monitored line, she said. Luca hesitated. Miss Singh, counsel usually advises against not direct. Recorded through intake desk, counsel copied. One sentence from me. I want it in the official log. Mateo studied her for one beat, then nodded. Do it. There was a brief shuffle of audio, distant office noise, a door opening. Then Ronan's voice arrived thin through the speaker, smooth even now. Grace, there you are. This got out of hand. Tell them you overreacted and we can resolve this privately. Her heart hammered, but her voice did not shake. Ronan Hale, hear me clearly. I revoke all personal access to me. You will not contact me except through attorneys. The debt is disputed as fraud. The assault is documented. I will testify." A beat of silence. Then Ronan gave a short laugh. "You think he owns the courts because he owns a few buildings?" Mateo stepped closer, shoulder almost brushing hers, and spoke toward the phone in a voice barely contained. "She is under my protection." Grace turned her head sharply. "Not like that." He looked at her, understood, and corrected in the same breath. "She is under protected legal status by her consent, and you will respect the boundary." Ronan's tone hardened. "You're making a mistake, Grace." "No," she said. "I made one years ago. This is the correction." She nodded once to Mateo. He ended the call. The silence after was dense but clean, free of pretense. Grace realized her hands were trembling again, not from fear this time, from the aftermath of finally saying the line out loud with witnesses. Mateo reached for her, then stopped himself an inch short. "May I?" She answered by placing her uninjured hand in his grip closed, warm and steady, no pressure beyond what she offered back. "You drew the line," he said quietly. "I needed him to hear it." He did. She looked at their joined hands, then up at him. "So do you." A muscle moved in his jaw. "Then hear mine. Anyone who threatens you answers to process first, to me second. I will not cross your terms." "Legal process comes first," she repeated, testing the shape of it. "Understood," he confirmed. Another knock came. Elena returned with a printed document already tabbed for signatures, Desai's amendments visible in tracked changes. Grace read every clause, made 2 edits in pen, and slid it to Mateo. He signed without negotiation. She signed after him, then watched Elena seal 1 copy for Desai and 1 for house records. When Elena left, dawn had begun to thin the darkness beyond the garden wall. A muted gray replacing black, Grace sank back into the chair, drained but steadier, legal boundary in ink, evidence archived, her own words now part of the official record. Mateo remained beside the fireplace, close enough to reach, far enough to respect the line she had drawn. For the first time since 2:17 a.m., she believed the next hour would not be decided by Ronan Hale. At 6:15 a.m., the tablet on the low table lit with the county seal, and Grace sat upright with her bandaged wrist in her lap, Desai's face in one corner of the screen and 2 detectives in the other, one asking questions while the other typed with relentless precision. Mateo remained by the far wall, exactly where Desai had positioned him, close enough to intervene if protocol failed and far enough that no one could claim he coached a word. The first detective confirmed chain of custody out loud. Original voice memo file hash matched the duplicate. Doc camera footage mirrored to legal archive and police server. Alarm logs pulled from building control room, clothing bagged and sealed in Grace's presence. Medical photographs time-stamped by Dr. Liao and transmitted under consent form 14B. "Ms. Singh," the detective said, "did anyone instruct you to trigger the dock alarm?" "No," Grace replied. "I did it myself to create witnesses and lock the lane." Desai gave a barely visible nod. The detective continued. "Did you know the sedan driver or passenger?" "No. I saw one silhouette in front before the gate sealed. Police identified both from their IDs after." "Did Mr. Hale access your mailbox without permission?" "He admitted reading my notices. I did not authorize that." The second detective looked up. "We've requested building mailroom and street camera pulls near your address for corroboration." The questions moved methodically through every flag detail, and Grace answered in clean sequence. The threat language, the forged signatures, the hand on her wrist, the pull at her collar, the attempt to force movement to the car. When asked about the young valet's reactions upstairs and at the dock. She described exactly what she had seen and what he later stated about repeated schedule requests. No adjectives, no embellishment, no apology for remembering. At 7:02, the call ended with formal confirmation that emergency protective orders were filed and granted pending hearing. Desai remained on the line long enough to set the next steps. Police intake accepted aggravated coercion, fraud, and assault charges, she said. Your temporary restraining order is active now. We have a financial freeze on disputed accounts by noon if the judge signs as expected. Don't open unknown messages. Don't respond to any outreach that isn't through me. Grace nodded. What about my agency? I already spoke to their counsel. Desai said, your assignment status is protected. No adverse notation allowed while criminal process runs. That resolved one of the tightest knots in Grace's chest. Lost work had always been one bad rumor away. After the call, Mateo crossed the room with a folder and set it in front of her without opening it. These are copies only. Originals stay in legal custody. You review when ready. Inside, each item had its own tab. Voice memo transcript, doc stills, alarm event report, medical summary, witness index, and a property receipt for 2 personal effects listed by description and seal number. Black service jacket with torn collar, gray scarf with rain staining. Even her pain had been converted into structured evidence. She almost cried from the dignity of that. By late morning, Elena escorted the young valet into a smaller office off the kitchen wing at Desai's request. Grace chose to attend, with Mateo outside the door. The valet sat stiff-backed, hands clasped so hard his knuckles blanched. My name is Thomas, he said quietly. I gave Hale 2 schedule windows this month. He told me he was reconciling with his wife. He showed me a photo of you 2 at what looked like a wedding reception. He swallowed. He also paid cash. My mother's medication was behind. I told myself it was only times, not keys. Grace held his gaze. At the dock, you looked at him like you were afraid. I was. His eyes dropped. The second time he came, he said if I stopped helping, he'd tell your agency you stole from service trays. He knew I had touched the petty cash envelope once and paid it back late. He said one call and I'd lose the job. Desai, on speaker, asked, did anyone in Belandi management authorize you to share staff movement? No, ma'am. I violated policy. I signed my statement. The loaded look from upstairs had an answer now. Fear, debt pressure, and a lie wrapped in familiarity. Grace did not excuse him. She also did not need to destroy him. I want his statement submitted, she said. And I want to note that coercion was used on him too. Desai paused, then said, noted. That supports pattern. On Thursday morning, 3 days after the dock incident, Grace sat in Housing Court Annex with Desai and a court-appointed forensic accountant while rain ticked against high windows. The disputed debt file lay open, each forged signature enlarged beside verified samples from Grace's hospital contracts. The judge adjusted her glasses, reviewed the comparison matrix, and signed the order voiding Hale-linked obligations in Grace's name pending final civil ruling. A second order barred any collector from reporting those balances against her credit file. Outside the courtroom, Desai handed Grace stamped copies. Keep these with your ID. If a collector calls, you give case number, nothing else. Grace tucked the documents into her bag and stood very still in the corridor until her breathing settled. For years, paper had been a weapon pointed at her. Today, paper had answered back. By the 3rd week of November, the criminal trial opened in a packed lower court with one local camera pool feed and a gallery full of observers who had expected a private dispute and found a documented coercion pattern instead. Grace took the stand in a charcoal suit Elena had tailored from house stock because her own blazer still sat sealed in evidence. Mateo sat behind counsel row in a dark suit, silent, hands clasped, never signaling her. He had promised not to speak for her, and he did not. The prosecutor moved through exhibits in the same sequence Grace had built under alarm lights. The voice memo admission, synchronized doc footage with visible time code, alarm activation logs, security witness statements, medical documentation, and the forensic audit tracing forged accounts and transfer chains. Ronan tried charm first, then wounded outrage, then technical confusion. Under cross-examination, each version collapsed against his own recorded words. At one point, his attorney asked Grace, "Isn't it true you escalated this confrontation deliberately?" "Yes," she said, clear and unflinching. "I escalated visibility to stop being isolated. I activated an alarm, not violence." A murmur ran through the gallery and then died when the judge looked up. Thomas testified too, voice shaking but steady enough, admitting schedule disclosures and describing Hale's pressure tactics. The senior house manager testified that temporary staff protocol existed precisely to prevent external targeting, and that Grace had no prior violations. The dock guard confirmed hearing Grace state refusal before physical contact. Even the flickering security light detail was addressed. Maintenance logs showed the circuit fault had been reported 2 days earlier, explaining visibility gaps, but not obscuring the camera angles that mattered. When the verdict came, it came without drama. Guilty on fraud, coercion, and assault counts. Sentencing followed that afternoon, given clear record and protective order urgency. Ronan stood in a Navy suit that no longer carried authority and received a custodial sentence, financial penalties, and a long-term no-contact order. He turned once toward Grace as deputies secured his wrists. But she did not look away this time, and she did not move. 6 weeks later, a dry winter sun fell across the waiting room of a clinic in Jackson Heights, where the walls held translated posters in 7 languages, and a hand-lettered sign near reception read, "Rights are the same in every language." Grace stood beside a whiteboard scheduling interpreter rotations while 2 junior translators asked about trauma-informed phrasing in intake interviews. She answered with practical calm, then checked the clock and stepped into her office for the call she no longer dreaded. Her landlord confirming receipt of court orders, arrears plan revised, lease stabilized under her name alone. At 6:40 p.m., she climbed the stairs to her apartment carrying groceries, a folder, and a fatigue that felt earned instead of crushing. The hallway paint still peeled near the radiators, and someone's dinner smelled like cumin and garlic through a half-shut door. Her phone buzzed once. Elena confirming that the last evidence release packet had arrived from court storage. Jacket and scarf cleaned by forensic protocol, tags removed, chain of custody closed. Another buzz followed from Desai. Final civil order entered. All fraudulent debt voided permanently. Case closed. Grace set the groceries down just long enough to unlock her door. Mateo was waiting inside by invitation, not assumption. Tall and still near the window in a dark coat, a small velvet box in his hand, and none of his men in the room. "You're early," she said. "I waited downstairs until your text," he replied. He held out the box. Inside, the silver coin rested on black lining, worn edge catching the kitchen light. Alongside it lay a typed receipt, signed by court clerk and both attorneys confirming release from evidence and transfer to Grace Singh, lawful owner. "Last item unaccounted for," he said. "Now resolved." She took the coin and felt its weight settle into her palm like a pulse she recognized. Then she looked at him. "And us?" Mateo exhaled slowly, as if control itself required effort here more than in any boardroom or courtroom. "I want to be part of your life. Not as your handler, not as your warden. As the man who shows up when invited and stays inside the boundaries you set." Grace studied him for a long beat, hearing the city through her window, hearing her own breathing, hearing the absence of fear where fear used to live. Then hear mine one more time. My name stays mine. My home stays mine. My work stays mine. Yes. If I say stop, you stop. Yes. If danger rises, we decide together. His answer came softer than she had ever heard it. Together. She closed the velvet box, then reopened it and tipped the coin into a chipped tea tin on her counter, where bus tokens and spare keys already waited. Lucky thing with ordinary things. When she turned back, Mateo had not moved closer, and that restraint was the final proof she needed. Then yes, she said, you can be part of my life. He crossed the room only after she lifted her hand toward him, and when his fingers closed around hers, the gesture held promise rather than possession. Outside, the city remained hard, and his world remained dangerous in ways no promise could erase. But inside her small apartment with the lock turned by her own hand and every thread tied off in ink, evidence, and choice, danger no longer ruled her.